Ladies and gentlemen, probably the most notoriously talked about name in the world of chess is Hans Niemann. Hans Niemann just went through a wild ride in 2022, and it's currently late November 2023, and he is back to competing actively in chess tournaments across the globe. He is currently playing a tournament in Croatia. It is called the Tournament of Peace. It's a nice name. But Hans Niemann did not show up to Zagreb, Croatia with peace on his mind. He has played 7 rounds of this tournament and has 6.5 out of 7 points, with many brilliant games to display. He has gained something like 20 elo. He is performing at an elo of 3,003 after 7 rounds of action. The last time that I made a video title that said Hans Niemann won with 100% accuracy, I was trying to gas the man up, as the kids say, hype them up. But Hans Niemann did not feel that way. He thought I was maybe playing into the insinuation. So Hans, and any Hans fan out there, this is an open message to all of you. I'm trying to hype Hans up, and I'm trying to bring some of these epic games to all of you at home. All right? And in today's video, I'm hoping to do exactly that, as Hans detonated a sensational game of chess upon us. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover some of the other games. This video is just getting one, because I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. I want to give all of these games a fair amount of time. Then he tweeted, the man is cooking, and we need a bad boy in the chess world, if you ask me. We need a guy that's going to talk the talk, he's going to walk the walk, and he's going to get some good results. So Hans played Grandmaster Robert Zelčić, who I believe is a 30 or 40-year-old Grandmaster from Croatia. He's also played a lot of very good players. Cheparinov, Sokolov, Ivanchuk, so do let me know, and I will cover those games. But this game, oh my. E4 is how Hans started. C6. Caro-Kann defense, played by Robert. And by the way, Robert doesn't have a photo on chess.com. Anytime a player doesn't have a photo on chess.com, I make an open plea to chess.com to reinstate the photo. Now, one more thing really quick. I'm going to Toronto to cover the Champions Chess Tour Finals. If you live in Toronto, or you know somebody who lives in Toronto, or you're in Canada, you want to come to Toronto, December 7th, link will be in the description. We're doing one last fan book event for the year. D4, December 7th. Tickets on sale now. D5, Caro-Kann defense. Hans plays E5. This is the most principled way of playing. It's the most aggressive way of playing. And we know Hans is like a pirate, right? He's gonna try to make things interesting and exciting and aggressive. He's like who's the pirate from the anime? Luffy, right? He's like that. They even look the same. C5 played by Zelčić. There are 2 main lines here: Bishop to F5, as well as C5. And Black chooses C5. This is one of the ways to instigate against White center. But White plays Knight to F3. So the critical line is D takes C5, accepting the pawn and basically saying you're not going to get it back anytime soon, so good luck. But in this game, instead of that, Hans plays Knight F3. And there are 2 lines here for Black. One of the lines is to take on D4 right away. If that happens, Hans might play Knight. He might play Knight takes D4, but he also might play Queen takes D4. There's this new edgy line that's becoming a little bit more popular. Knight C6 attacks the queen, and then the queen comes to F4. I don't know if that's what Hans had in mind, because after Knight to F3, Black did not take on D4, and instead played the move Knight to C6. So, yeah. Knight C6, and now Hans took on C5. So, all of that for nothing, right? Like, you know, D takes C5, and maybe Hans thought his opponent would play E6 and would not play Knight C6, but by forcing his opponent to play Knight C6, DC is now played, and Hans says, no, I'm no prick me dainty. I'm not just giving you the pawn on C5. You're not just gonna walk all over me. You can't have the pawn on C5, as a matter of fact. If bishop takes C5, bishop C5, queen A5 check, I will play B4. So that's not possible. And if bishop E3, queen A5 check, either C3 threatening B4 or queen D2, and Black's not going to win this pawn back. So White essentially says, you know what? I ain't giving you the pawn. You had a chance, you played in a way that blocked your bishop, and now I'm not going to give you the pawn back. So Black plays Knight to H6. This is the vertical move. Trying to play Knight G4, trying to play Knight F5. Both moves target the bishop. Knight F5 also targets the bishop if it goes to D4. Knight G4 also targets the pawn. White has many options here. White can actually take and damage black's structure, but then white will lose support of c5, and even though you do damage black's pawns and maybe weaken the king, it's not for everybody. White plays c3, right? So a couple of ideas behind c3. Number one, the bishop will be glued into the center and therefore defending everything. Number two, you will play b4, and you will create this big cluster on the side of the board. Zelchich plays knight f5. As you can see here, Hans already kind of, I mean, from the time usage, seems like on his own, right? I don't think he would spend 8 minutes in the opening if he wasn't on his own. So knight f5, and now bishop d4. Now, all of this has been played before. Essentially, white now hangs on to both center pawns and says you can't have them. Black, meanwhile, will develop his bishops and castle, and then probably undermine with b6. And the computer evaluates this position as equal, but it's a little bit hard to play with black because you're a pawn down. So, like, at the end of the day, after a while, any human here is going to just, you know, malfunction a little bit and get a little bit aggressive, try to do something, and maybe it won't work. So bishop d4, bishop d7 played by black. He's still not thinking, right? Rook c8, b6, bishop e7, maybe f6 in the future. A lot of ideas. And Hans plays bishop e5. Bishop b5 technically hangs a pawn. Technically. It technically hangs a pawn because now black can play knight takes e5, which is a move that he cannot play normally, but in this case he can play it because the knight defends the bishop. And if you take this knight, then he's going to take your bishop, preventing you from castling. So Hans decides to not engage in a theoretical discussion. He spends a few minutes on this move. I mean, again, he also could be bluffing, and this could have all been his preparation. But you could play like a3 here, and then try to play b4. So Hans plays b5, bishop b5. Now, again, black could do nothing. Black could just like play bishop e7. But then if you do nothing for too long when you play black, you're going to have a really tough time winning the pawn back. So I will take, maybe take, and then, you know, play knight a3 and hold my queen side together. Yeah, instead of engaging in all of that, Hans plays bishop e5, forces this move, basically. Knight takes e5. Very big decision. Do you take on d7? Or do you take the knight? So, bishop takes d7 is possible, but then black goes back and the pawn is still hanging. Then you have to play b4, at which point black will play rook c8. You can castle, but black is going to also develop his pieces, play b6, and smash these pawns in the future. So believe it or not, instead of all that, knight takes e5 is what white chooses. And my question is, how is Hans Niemann ever going to castle? How's he going to castle? With black also pressuring his bishop and pressuring his pawn, like black's next moves are very obvious. His next 3 moves, right? So what is Hans going to do here? Well, Hans plays a4. That move makes sense. You either force the bishop to go back to its hole or to hang out on a6, trying to prevent you from castling. He does go back to d7. I guess after bishop a6, he just didn't like b4. And it's very simple. You will just get hit with b5. You can play knight takes d4. White will go here. Who's stopping b5? Like, by the time, you know, suddenly look at this. That's not very pleasant. So instead of all that, instead of dealing with Hans's pawn avalanche, he goes back to d7, and Hans... What? a5? But what about castling? Why did Hans spend 24 minutes, 25 minutes, 24, 25 on what? That's a weird move. You know, I might even message Hans. I might be like, what? a5, that's not a move that I as a human... I mean, I'm looking at this, right? Bishop to e7, then I'm looking at b4. But that's why I'm commentating the tournament and Hans is playing it, right? Like, this is what looks good to me. Why on earth would you ever play a5? So, bishop b5, number one, is a question, but that's actually not a huge deal because it looks like black, but b4 is still very strong. So, it's not really the problem that bishop b5 is happening. It's more the problem of, like, what's happening now? Right? Like, why? Okay. a5, wow. Okay. a6 is what was played in the game, by the way. a6 was played. So, castles. Finally. Hans down 28 minutes on the clock, but the position is kind of a a fresh position, and Hans has a little bit of space on this side of the board, right? Black plays bishop e7. I already told you this is Black's idea. Hans takes the bishop. Hans takes the bishop because traditionally, in most situations, a knight will be the better piece to trade. But also, if Hans waits a little longer, this bishop will go to b5. And then it will live there, and there is no b4, there is no b5, and the bishop is very powerful in this diagonal. So Hans trades, and will he take the pawn? Excuse me. Not will he take the pawn. Oh my goodness, I need another coffee. Not will he take the pawn. He is eyeing this pawn. He's not going to take it at the moment. It is defended. I mean, he could take it at the moment, but then I wouldn't be making a video about this game. Or maybe I would. But he has eyes on it for the future. And now he plays b4, completely giving away the bishop. Just basically saying that bishop is a glorified big pawn and black castles. Okay. Both sides have made 15 moves of this game. So far, nothing impressive. The sides have played an opening, but now what, right? Like, how is white looking to make use of his space advantage? White has a 4-on-2 brewing on this side of the board, 4 pawns versus 2. Will he try to win an endgame? Will he try to target this side of the board? That seems unlikely. It seems pretty unlikely that Hans Niemann is going to create an attack on the king side here. He's not threatening mate. I don't really, and black is always threatening to take his bishop. So Hans plays knight d2. Now, black can take. And then black can play queen b5. But believe it or not, at some point, the simple threats against white's position run out. Then, after a couple of more preparatory moves, Hans will trade queens, and then he will play b5. So in a perfect situation, what will happen is something like this, where Hans just has long-term endgame pressure on those pawns that he advanced so early in the game. Because in every position, you have to think about where the pawn breaks are going to happen, and you have to think about who would be happier with what trade. This is the biggest weakness in white's position, but it is very comfortably defended by the knight, and the knight also comfortably defends this pawn break. So if anybody's winning this battle, it is white's knight, and because white has more space, on the only side of the board that matters, white controls the tempo of play. So, knight f3 is what was played in the game. Rook e8, rook e1, right? So all of those things happen. b4 castles. Excuse me. Knight takes d4, well, like, if that were to all happen, right? But bishop d8 was the move chosen by Zelčić. So he played bishop to d8. I guess he's trying to reroute. He's not ever going to successfully land b5, but he could potentially use his pawns like this. Hans now plays bishop to e5. So he is ready to meet this move with a capture. Okay. Then knight b3. Also, he is ready to induce f6. Hans is daring his opponent to start touching his pawns. Daring him, because the second you start moving your pawns onto one color, the other color complex gets weak, right? So Hans is daring his opponent to play f6, and the opponent does. He says, you know what, I think that's stupid of you to allow f6, so f6. And now Hans rotates to g3. Now things change. If you want the bishop, I no longer have to put a pawn there. So my cluster stays together and stays strong. I don't have to go here, weakening my structure. Go ahead and take me. Black does. He thinks for a little bit. He does take the pawn on g3. Now a big decision, take toward the center, which is traditionally what you're supposed to do, or take away from the center and open up the rook. Hans chooses the principled approach, and the opponent finishes the reroute with bishop to c7. Now, position is still kind of closed. The way you evaluate whether a position is closed or open is the amount of pawns on the board. And in this case, they have 7 each, which traditionally means that the position is closed. But there are openings, right? There's openings, and it's very imbalanced. It's a very imbalanced closed position. 4-on-2 over here. Black, the only one on the board with center pawns. White has no center pawns, right? White had to take away from the center. So black might want to go here, and white might try to utilize, for example, that square. That square looks really juicy, like getting a knight to b6. But you can't really do that, because if knight c4, you get taken, right? So that doesn't quite work. So how are you going to take advantage of black's position here? Well, you're going to play knight c4. Oh, because of the pin. Look at Hans utilizing that, right? And Hans, by the way, look at his time. he spent a lot of time in the opening, right? He spent a lot of time in the opening, but now he sped up. So he started understanding the position a little bit, right? He got to a position where he started understanding, let me get my knight here, right? Oh, he wants to trade bishops with me? Yeah, let's not do that. Let's not trade. Let's play bishop e5. And let's trade this way. Very important the way we trade and what the fallout is. Knight c4, and now Hans lands the knight on b6. And the knight is stuck there, you know, like keratin debris, if you will, right? It's stuck there. It's stuck on b6. The only way to get rid of it is to take it. But if you take it, white's pawns come alive. Now I am always knocking on the door. And when I split the b pawn, I'm going to get that. And my pawn's a passer. It is a pass pawn. 2 squares away from queening at all times. So in all endgames, white is going to win. Because white will deflect this pawn and queen. That is very, very important. So black really doesn't have a choice. He's got to leave the pawn there. Plays queen c6, right? Hans brings his rook. Very simple, very straightforward. Slides the rook. Good pressure. Looking to use his pawns, but not yet. This cluster is very powerful, very annoying. Black needs to do something with his pawns. So it's very difficult for black to do nothing. Black needs to do something with his pawns. But if he plays e5, d5 gets really weak and suddenly becomes a target. Now he gets out of the way, suddenly rook d1. Now black could play d4, of course, but the pawn is walking to its own death, right? I'm going to hit the queen. I'm going to force the queen to move. I'm going to get in, right? So the problem here for black is that after something like rook e1, it's very tough for him to make a decision. So he plays h6. He spends 7 minutes and he pushes a pawn. But you might remember on the this is the 22nd move, on the 17th move of the game, Hans got his opponent to play the f pawn to f6. It used to be really nice. Black used to have a dark squared bishop complemented by 6 pawns out of 7 on light squares. The light squares had a harmony to them. The dark squares had a harmony to them. Hans slowly forced 1 pawn to go in a dark square, and now out of inertia, another pawn. If there was anything black should have done, it's probably g6. He probably should have kept more of a light squared control, and then if white played queen e2, he can even defend with his king. It's ugly, but it's kind of difficult for white to do anything. White would have to probably start using his pawns. Hans would have to try doing something on that side of the board. dc, you can reroute the knight, right? But black plays h6. And now there are just the slightest of weaknesses. We see this eval creeping up a bit. But can Hans take advantage of that evaluation? Queen d3. Tough moment. This queen trade is terrible now. Not to mention you lose this pawn, but this endgame is overwhelming. That cluster, that really key a5 move. Hans played that mysterious a5 move on the 12th move of the game. And look at the structure later. Suddenly it's making sense. Black now starts fighting in the center, but the evaluation is growing. The more that black... How many pawns is that? 1, 2, 3 of his 6 pawns are now on light squares. Dark squares, excuse me. They're on dark squares, weakening the light squares. The harmony, black's dark squared bishop is stuck behind the dark squared pawns. Its only option is to perish against the knight. Hans plays rook d1, and suddenly Zelchich is realizing, I don't really know how to defend this pawn that I just advanced, so I have to take. But I told you a long time ago, that opens up a whole new host of problems. That simple trade leaves white with a massive majority of pressure. So in every endgame now, black might not lose, but black will suffer tremendously. Not like a Buddhist either. All right, there's no suffering and then a higher afterlife. None of that. I think he's just gonna suffer. He plays rook d7. Now, Hans has a target. Hans has a target. Hans has a target. He has a target, right? What else he has is light squares that were weakened by his opponent. So Hans methodically, surgically screws the queen into f5 where it cannot be removed. It cannot be removed with a pawn, and the only way to remove it with a queen is to offer an exchange. So that's what black does. He plays rook e8. Hans plays rook d2. Preparing. Very simple. Preparing. Now, if black plays queen e6, look at this jump. How is that possible? Because of this. It's all because of this. Now it's impossible to defend yourself. You play d4, you just lose the pawn. So you can't defend yourself. Rook d2, he plays rook d8 instead of queen e6. He's waiting. He's basically just waiting for Hans to arrive. Now it is up to Hans. Will Hans find a way? It's queens and rooks. poking and prodding. Light squared weaknesses are good. All of this is good. This is all generalist type of concepts. But can Hans find a concrete way in? F4. Look at this. Look at this, forcing black to make a critical decision. This is, by the way, one of the last two pawns that hasn't had a chance to move yet. This pawn is going to struggle to move. This pawn has a free hand, F4. Nothing looks good here anymore for black. If you take this pawn, Hans could take with the queen or the pawn, but that pawn's an isolated pawn now. And black could try to bulldoze it forward. Hans could play rook d1. He could also just play c4. Just wait. Pawn's walking into death. It's walking to its own death. And there is nothing black can do. Nothing. Every square in white's position is accounted for. Rook d1, rook d4. Hide the king on h2 where it's safe. f4, nice move by Hans. e4 is what black chooses. Rook d4. Now it's just a matter of time. Now, if I asked you whether this was a tactical game or a positional game, a game that was decided by squares, maneuvers, trades, structure, that would be a positional game. Hans won a very nice strategic game, right? No. The underlying strategy, maneuvers, pawn structures, trades, and decision-making, yes, was positional. But now, black tries to fight back. And chess is like 99% tactics. You have probably heard this before. Well, this game is no different. King to f7, queen to h5 check, forcing the king back to his lair. Now g4. Hans decides, I don't want to win this game by slowly prying my opponent's defenses apart. I want to combine my positional dominance with a tactical strike on the black position. He pushed these pawns out of inertia. He didn't know what he was getting himself into. When you push the pawns in front of the king where you've castled, they turn into hooks. Hooks are pawn targets that the attacking side can exploit to force exchanges. The queen goes to e6. Rook goes to d1. More pressure here. All three pieces there. c4 critical. Going to bulldoze that side of the board. f5, g5, queen g6. Black plays e3, trying to create counterplay, but now he has removed the synergy of his position. Queen goes to f5. Hans created the threat of tactics. He was knocking on the door. He created the threat that he is going to go checkmate his opponent. His opponent had a drastic overreaction, like in any combat, right? That if a fighter is reacting to a shot that's hurting them, well, now, queen f5. That pawn has wandered too far. That pawn will be stopped by a rook or a king, and the game is over. You're going to lose the endgame. Zelchich decides, you know what? No queen trade. I'm going to play an endgame. So Hans says, okay, rook e1. I don't want to go. He decides, I want my queen on the board. I don't want to go for an endgame. I want to create counterplay. Black tries to create counter. Look at this, a5. We have completely forgotten about that pawn. That pawn can't move. There's no way. There's nothing that pawn can even do. But there it goes. Now Hans has to decide, is he going to acknowledge this? Is this worth acknowledging? Is the pawn's going to sneak by, right? You could take, but then suddenly you're, look at this, destabilizing your advantage. So what is Hans going to do? Well, g5. What is Hans doing? His rooks can't help him, right? They're stuck. So what gives? He takes on b4, right? Now look at this was very clever. He just takes on b4. Nope. Hans had a crazy idea here to take on h6. Oh. So if black just takes, which of course makes a lot of sense, right? If black just takes, then Hans takes, and now black's in big trouble. Black's in big trouble. Split pawns, huge weaknesses. Weakness, weakness. Black can't guard everything. White will play queen h3, threatening the pawn, threatening on e3, and win. But black had a tactical idea in mind. Against g takes h6, he's going to take Hans's next pawn on c3. Now, Hans is winning. He's winning. But how? He doesn't know that. He doesn't see that during the game. You see it now. You say, oh, he's winning, he's winning, he's winning. Well, it's easy. I just take with check. No. Stupid? No. Oh, well, that's really easy. h7. Of course, yes. Of course, h7. But Black will just play here. How are you making a queen? This is not easy. Queen h5 check, threatening to queen. Black plays g6. You can't make a queen. He takes your queen. What did Hans miss? He didn't miss anything. All the way back here, Black played a5, and Hans played g5. Hans knew if Black takes back, takes, and he's chilling. But Hans also realized that after takes, h7, king f7, there's a rabbit out of a hat. Queen h5 check, pawn to g6. And Hans Niemann did not promote to a queen, but he promoted to a knight. That was the critical move of the entire sequence. And now White is winning. But guess what? White can win in a variety of different ways here, but he chooses to win in style. King to g7. The knight gets out, and Black takes on c5. Now I got news for you. It's actually not over. If, let's say, in this position, you respect this threat and go back to, let's say, d3, c2 threatens a queen, you have to defend, and Black wins the rest of your pawns. And despite having an extra knight, you are not winning. You're not winning. It's very difficult to win this position. Very difficult. Rook c2 is a nice way to hang all your rooks. And also, I think there's even e2, which forces a queen. So, how do you win after queen c5? Well, Hans finds it. He finds the best move. Zipping out to the right. The knight promotes here and now zips out this way, tactically defending the rook with a check. Knight to f5 is a fork. So the rook is completely sacrificed. This was his second brilliant move according to Chess.com Game Review, but this is hardly a brilliant move at the 2659 level. Black plays king g8, avoiding knight f5 check. Hans plays knight f5 anyway because he's up a knight and he needs to use it. And now Black is on the verge of total defeat, so he throws the pawn forward, very close to promotion. Hans doesn't need to acknowledge it. Queen g6. Now he cannot go here, so how is he going to win? Okay, he could give a check. He took the pawn with check. How's he going to win? Plays knight h6. Black plays king h7. You got nothing. So Hans finds the surgical, methodical way to finish this off. Knight to h6. In this position, Black can not only take the rook, he can also queen. What is even the threat? Black resigned in this position. Why? Well, if he made a queen, check here, check here, and the hero pawn, queen f6 mate. Despite being down a full queen, the king is mated because of the pawn on b6. This incredible synergy of the white position. So Black cannot play c1 queen, and Black can't do this either because check lures you into knight f5. You can't take the queen just yet because your own is hanging. Queen g5, only winning move. You check the king to avoid being captured, and then you take, and then you win. Hopefully. Hopefully you win. What a game. 3 brilliant moves. What a surgical, like such a nice positional squeeze. You know, utilizing the queenside space advantage, avoiding the damaging of the structure the second that he had an opportunity. He got out of the way, so he kept the cluster together. And then he transferred in his knight. He hopped over the barrier with knight c4, knight b6. He blocked his opponent on the center lines, induced light squared weaknesses, and then utilizing his space advantage and the overextended black pawns, he started an attack. He combined positional problems with an attacking motif, threatened the queen trade to win the endgame, and then when things got spicy, found, I mean, it's not every day you get to do that. So, Hans Niemann, 6.5 out of 7 in the Tournament of Peace, not bringing the peace at all. And he also put out this after his game today. I like the moment when I break a man's ego. 6.5 out of 7, 23 rating points gained against the monster field. I can cover any of those games if you'd like me to. There have been some incredible ones. And my open message to Hans and Hans fans is, if I say you win perfect games, I am not in any way, shape, or form insinuating wrongdoing, as I have been over the last year plus. This is epic stuff. It's cool to see the comeback. It's cool to see some really great games being played. And my only complaint, though, is that technically, this is not letting the chess speak for itself. I understand it, you know, I get it, but it's also not technically letting the chess speak for it. Just technically, I'm just saying. I'm not trying to nitpick. You know. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Hans Niemann cooking in Croatia. Get out of here. And come to the event in Toronto. But seriously, get out of here.